All right, everyone, welcome back. Now, I know at the end of my last video, I mentioned that we would start with, updating values inside of our variables in real time in order to get things to move on the screen. And we will get to that, but I wanted to talk about one more thing before we did that. All right, because it's important. It deals with variables, but I didn't mention it in the previous video for the sake of time. And what that is the idea of something called a system variable. All right. So what I have on the screen is a particular lesson in the online textbook that accompanies this course. All right. So I've got that. There's a link in the code. In the video main description, as well as the playlist description of to this main page here. So what I've done, I've just gone into the intro to coding, that very first section, and in that first chapter here, this coding basics, I've gone to the lesson on variables. I'm not going to go through all of this, but if you wanted to go through and read this, there's a lot of information that I've just, also I've just gone over in that previous video. Excuse me, this is the problem with doing all of these streams live. I just got a little gassy right there. Okay. So if I scroll down, we've got some things, and I'm going to be talking about these changeable values later on as a way to make things automatically adjust on our canvas and things that will change around in real time in our codes, but that's going to be in the next videos. What I want to talk about is the idea of system variables. All right. So these variables are things that already exist within the code of P5. Okay, so if you're trying to make a variable in your code and you want to give it, one of these names or another name that happens to be a system variable, these are just some of the more common ones, you won't be able to because this already exists in P5. And they're storing certain values in the background of the program. So you don't have to make these, they're already there. You can just type out in the code that I want to use this value in some case. And we will get into that in just a second. So some of the more common ones, we have mouse X and mouse Y, and that is the mouse's location when it's on the canvas, as well as P mouse X and P mouse Y, and that's just the previous location. So these are storing numbers of the pixel location, just like when we were picking a spot to put our rectangle or our ellipse. That's just the X and Y location of the mouse and then the previous one. If you press a key, it will tell you what key you have pressed here. So this will be stored as a value there, so you can say, hey, later on we'll be saying when one particular key is pressed code, now I want you to do a thing. We'll get into that as kind of the next section here. That'll be in our conditionals chapter, and that'll be some of the basis for some interactivity later on in the course. We have key code, and that's for things like enter, up arrow, things where we can't just say, what key was pressed, A. Well, there's no letter for the up arrow, so things like that will be helpful. A few other common ones are things like the width and the height, and that's the current width and height of the canvas in pixels. All right, so that's there. There's another idea of the Boolean system variables, and these are anything that's Boolean. It's essentially binary. It only has two states, true or false, 1, 0, yes, no, this kind of thing. Some of the more common ones that are used in this course are the idea, or mouse is pressed, or key is pressed. And this is just the computer checking to say, is the mouse pressed? Yes or no. Is the mouse pressed? Yes or no. Is the mouse pressed? Yes or no. Every time the draw function loops. And then the same thing with the key. Is any key pressed? Yes or no. And it just stores either true or false in this value until we get that. Okay, so I'm going to go up and pull up a code here. This is just where we left off in the last video with an introduction to variables. We've got a few variables here. So I've got that there, but I want to use just a few system variables real quick. And in order to do that, I'm going to pull up in this new function here. It's going to be the console, and it's going to be the dot log. All right. So what this will do is it will put whatever we tell it to in the parentheses here inside of our console. And in this case, it'll be every time the draw function loops. So we've got that there. So I want to start talking to some variables. So if I'll say mouse X, mouse Y. You know what? Let's also talk to mouse is pressed. And you notice these turned pink because they're system variables. We'll do that. So if I run this code, we see our square from last time, but we get 0, 0, and false appearing in our code here. So now what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to start moving my mouse across the screen on the canvas. And I'm going to try and get it right on 0, 0, that point there. I'm pretty close. Get that. And as I move it around, as I move it all the way from left to right, you'll notice that that first value, that mouse X, is increasing. And then as I move it down now, the X is more or less staying the same, and the Y is increasing. And now when I click, you'll notice that the false changes for true. I'm going to click and hold my mouse now. So we see that it's staying true. These are system variables. We didn't have to make them. We didn't have to assign them any value. They're just automatically being made every time we load up a sketch. The values are automatically being stored in there. We just have to say where we want this to happen and where we want to use this in the code. All right. So before I get off the idea of console log, this will be something that'll come back a lot later and just displaying information in the console. This will probably be one of the most effective things you can do in order to get information back and figure out where your code might be broken if you're getting problems. So I just want to say don't forget about console log. I'm probably going to have a whole video dedicated to just console.log a little bit later on, but this will be a way that you can get values back. So you have mouse X, mouse Y. Let's make another one here. I'm just gonna copy this, paste it, and comment out the first one. And only instead of this, we're gonna say key code, and instead of mouse is pressed, we're going to go to key is pressed. All right, so we have that there. Now our console.log looks a little bit different now. We still get a number, and we still get the false, but now we have this kind of thing going on. This is essentially just the quotations, like when we're making a string here on line 14, only it's empty, so there's nothing there. So if I go into the canvas here, I'm going to hit the space bar. Now we have something in our string. It just happens to be a space, so we can't see it. The key code for the space bar happens to be 32, and I'm not currently holding it down, so it's going on as false. And now I'm going to hold down the up arrow. So now we get arrow up. I believe also up underscore arrow will work if you're trying to input this value. It happens to be number 38. And since I'm holding down the key, it's saying true. As soon as I let go, it goes back to false. Just like when the mouse is pressed, only now it's any keyboard. So now I can do other things. I type in W, A, S, D. So if I'm holding down... let's go ahead. I'm going to press P right now. So we get P, it's number 80. If I hit Shift P, you notice that we still get, we had that for a second, but now we had, hold on. Sorry, the Shift was the last thing I hit. That's why it's staying there. but we had the lowercase p was different than the capital P. You can scroll back in the video and pause it and see that those are different characters there, so the computer will view them differently. I let go of shift after I let go of P, so that's what's staying in the console right there. So that is that. Just the idea of system variables, things that are, just in the system, essentially. I'm going to do one more just to go about it and say console.log. There's actually a few more I want to show you. Width, height, window width, if I could spell. And last but not least, window height. All right, so now we're getting 4 numbers. I'm mentioning this just because some of them are on the lists. These first 2, the width and height, are the current width and height of the canvas. If I were to go in here and change this, you'll notice that now they update in our console.log. The last 2, window width and window height, if you were to do this on your own computer, you would very possibly get different numbers for each of those. And what these are, this is essentially the maximum amount of pixels that you can make in the canvas on your screen by default. You can go bigger than this and scroll on your canvas, but for now, if I wanted to have the biggest canvas I could, I would have to make it 946 by 809. And you'll notice now my canvas is filling up all of the width I have here, 946 pixels, and all of the height of 809. I have that there. If I were to go bigger and make it 1000 by 1000, you can still do that, but now we have to scroll our canvas. So that as we get into some more stuff and you find yourself needing more space, you can use the window width and window height as a way to figure out exactly how much space you have to work with on your screen. So I'm going to end this just as a reference to my last one of with some comments. Console.log with mouse system variables. Copy that. With keyboard. And last but not least, console.log with screen system variables. So we have that there, and that kind of wraps up this little short lesson on system variables. In the next one, what I'm going to do is what I promised I was going to do at the end of my last video with that had a bunch of metaphors about houses and walls and stuff, and just talk about how to make things move on the screen. And the way we're going to do that is by updating and replacing these values here in real time using some basic math. And then at the end of that, I'm also going to utilize system variables in a way to do it in a slightly different way. We'll get into that in the next video. Nothing too crazy. This was just a short little one. So, all right, have a nice day. If you want to experiment with these, feel free. No real assignment to leave you with for this one, but